All right, TK. So thank you for joining us today. For those that aren't aware, why don't you fill everybody in and where you have been and where you're at now?
Fuck. Where I've been. I've had more jobs than fucking tie-dye t-shirts at this point.
Strong start.
Yeah. So currently, I work for UFC as a S&C coordinator. Essentially, just a fancy way to say S&C coach for those various fighters, men, women, various weight classes or whatever. Here, based at the PI in Vegas. I've been previously as at UMass men's basketball for a season, Kansas City in the NWSL, professional women's soccer, Astros for 2 years. Over in the UK before that, I was in London for 2 years working on masters and also working like some professional rugby and doing a bit with some few fighters there and some like basketball players and stuff like that. Then before that, I was at Arkansas State, worked for Kia in Japan, over at Toshiba Brave Lupus in Tokyo. They're under the Arkansas State. I started coaching there, I think 2014, I want to say. And I started off personal trains like certification. I was like 18, 19, something like that, like 2013. Because I knew I wanted to be an S&C coach then. So then I knew I had to coach. So I just started personal training originally.
So for anybody that's listening out there and they're like, man, I'm now working with a sport I've never worked with before. You went from MLB to soccer to basketball to UFC. Like, what's your piece of advice to somebody that's working with a new sport that they may feel like, man, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing?
I think initially watching the sport, just watching like pull a game on YouTube or something like that, watch a couple. Like when I've moved back to US from London, like the very first thing I did is I had not watched a baseball game since I was like 10 years old or something like that, like a minor league game. And I probably just ate hot dogs and pretzels the entire time. So I could not stand baseball. Like I thought it was so boring. So like I'm fine. So I literally before my flight, I downloaded like illegally on YouTube like 3 or 4 baseball games, like start to finish, like the fucking a World Series game, a random regular season game I was on YouTube. And like I spent an entire flight watching the game. And then in my head, I'm like, fuck me, this is boring. but I like took notes and like wrote down like, okay, what are the key things I see? Oh, okay. For pitchers, a big one is external rotation of the shoulder. You can see how far the arm actually goes back on the throwing arm. Oh, there's a drive leg and like basically a breaking leg on that lead leg. Oh, hitters, it's a very quick rotation on that lead leg, but it's a similar thing. There's like a drive leg and a plant leg and that like rotation. How is not a ton of sprinting, but there's some sprinting, and also every hamstring injury pretty much occurs going to first base. Either going to first base or first to third is like the vast majority of hamstring injuries in baseball. So it was like three or four things I wrote down from watching all these games that I kind of picked up on. And so I say that's like the first thing is like watching the actual sport, regardless of how much you may not necessarily like it. It's like it's part of your job. And also like your athletes don't give a fuck that you never played the sport and don't care. They don't care that you don't like it. Like it's your job to coach them to the best of like your ability. And then after that, it's like talking to the coaches and asking them what they see, what they feel like could be better, what they feel like they've worked for them. Sometimes you can get up and mix like a wide variety of answers because sometimes sport coaches don't really know what happens in their actual sport. But that's kind of part of the game. You kind of pick and choose like the things that are valuable. And then kind of third one is like speaking to the players themselves. Like, hey, like what's worked for you in the past? What's got you this far? What's some things you don't like? What things you do like? What's some you've seen that's worked with maybe previous S&C coaches you've had? Stuff like that. That's probably my 3 big pieces where if you're going to a sport, you have no idea what's going on. Or like you've never done it yourself. Or that. That's probably the 3 biggest ones. Because I was an awful soccer player. I enjoyed watching soccer, but I'm an awful soccer player.
Same thing within that. How do you give somebody the piece of advice, and how did you handle working with so many different populations? You know, you had professional men, professional women, then you had amateur men, and now you're handling amateur and professionals at the UFC, or is it all professionals?
All professionals. So with the PI, it's just like UFC fighters are allowed to train. They're allowed to bring in training partners. Sometimes you get guys from like other organizations or like amateurs. But for the most part, it's entirely like professional, like UFC fighters. I would say the biggest piece of advice when it comes to working various like personalities is just being pretty genuine and being yourself, because people can see those, they see through like inauthentic, like inauthenticity like very easily. And like some ways, I think like one of the benefits of social media is that it's giving us the ability to pick apart when someone's not authentic. So you can see, like we can all read now when someone's trying way too hard. It's like you don't have to use the same slang as them. Like your first week there, like they know you don't speak the language of the sport, and that's perfectly fine. Like it's okay. It's okay to it's okay to you never played soccer once in your life. Like it's all good. Like,
And
but
you
being
still feel
open
that
about it,
you still feel that way when you took that UFC job, you know, because some of our listeners out there might be like, hey, you know, this is something that I want to get into, but you know what, I never got in combative sports. Is that how people are looking at it? You know, they just want somebody that knows their body, knows what they need to perform well when they're in the cage.
yeah, and also just asking the questions and asking the right questions, and like being and don't not asking a question just for then you to tell someone they're wrong, like actually listening and getting like the value of like, oh, okay, this is what I feel like it's worked for me in the past. This is what I feel like I enjoy. This is how my schedule kind of works from training wise, stuff like that. But I think just being vulnerable and being able to ask them the questions and allow them to give you the answers. Because they this point, especially within combat sports, like now, especially in this era of UFC fighters, most of them either just started with just MMA, or maybe they come from other backgrounds, but they've been doing some version of a martial art for well over a decade. Most of them. It was like they have kind of an idea what's going on.
How about, you know, in your prior role with Houston, you were the return to play coordinator. Are you having that same title and you the return to play coordinator there at the UFC, or just a strength and conditioning coach?
Just strength and conditioning coach. I'm probably going to end. It seems like I might lean a bit towards like I think that's like a gap they feel like they kind of had this last couple of years of just like kind of meshing that rehab and like performance kind of process a bit more. So I think me and like the head PT are probably going to work on that as like an aside project, but like my general role is just like S&C coach. But
So
because you work on a small group and individual basis a lot here, like is that it becomes easy though to marry the two.
how did you become that, you know, return to play guru, if you will, or return to play guy everywhere that you went, right? Like you speak on it in fundamentals, you've spoke on it before, but how did you get there? And to those listeners out there that are in that position, what's your piece of advice? And to those that are trying to create that niche, what did you do to be able to do that?
I would say early on, part I got into the rehab side was that I knew at some point, like even though I was just working on a system with like rugby and stuff, like I knew at some point I needed like a designated responsibility. And I was like, okay, so it won't be a speed because I had Ian Tappan would take a lot of speed stuff, conditioning stuff. The gym program was Tom. Tom or Tappan, a mix of both. But there was a gap in like the return to play side. I was like, oh, okay, we need someone who can handle rehab. TKD want to do it. And I just like said yes because I wanted some like autonomy in one area. And so I knew like early on, like that was a big part of my, because you can't just be like, can't always be the assistant who just does everything. It's like, that's great. But at some point you can kind of run to a brick wall because then you're not, sometimes you can become pigeonholed as someone who's not really good at any one thing because you're kind of okay at a bunch of things. So you never had that autonomy. So I knew I wanted to gain that early on. So once I was given that opportunity, I then like kind of just dived in to the various like return to play, like rehab kind of like specialists, if you will, of like Fiona Partland. I was at EIS, who runs like the rehab institute there, or used to. He's left now, but Bill Knowles, obviously a huge one in the U.S. Reading different return to play specific kind of books, understanding anatomy at a deeper level. I kind of went back into like old school like anatomy books. Like I think I have like the Gray's Anatomy book like on a PDF that I probably downloaded illegally, allegedly. And so like so even understand deeper knowledge like anatomists to have those conversations with like physios, physical therapists, athletic trainers. So that way I feel like, because we all know we've all dealt with like medical staff. We feel like your S&C coaches are just like the meatheads of the group. Oh, they just lift and run. It's like, no, we actually understand the human body and understand biology and like things like that in physics to a level that sometimes you guys don't. Like, and so I think that was probably the big piece, was like being able to speak a general language with the physios and like physical therapists. So they instantly feel like we just want guys to be able to lift and run and sprint. It's like, no, also like want them to be healthy. But also sometimes health and performance aren't on the same spectrum. So maybe someone having perfect joint capsule space in their shoulder isn't the reason perfect, like, isn't, like, maybe we're chasing the wrong thing here. It's like, can this motherfucker throw a ball without pain? Yes. Can he throw it hard? Yes. Sweet. All right, great. Chuck him back out there. He'll be all right. But I think having that, and then finding ways and like doing some research and like be objective about it as well when return to play. Like I mean, I've reached a point now where like I cannot stand the idea of like guessing in return to play and rehab. Like if we can take as many boxes to be like objective, kind of stack the deck in our favor, like we should definitely we should definitely do that. I'm like, see, that's you're dealing with, you're rehabbing someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's father, someone's mother. And if it's a professional sport, it's like, yo, this is this person's livelihood. This is their career. So like, you should not be fucking guessing. Like,
so how do you handle that with any of the people, going in a world where you're the new person, and if they're like, oh, so and so has this injury, it should take them X long. I know you're not a timeline guy. You just said it. You're objective. You're progress based. How do you go about interacting with those, whether it's the coaches or whether it's somebody win the UFC that's like, look, so-and-so has to fight or, take this match. And you're like, look, I'm telling you, they're not ready, but they'll say, hey, it's been, 12 weeks. They should be ready. What are you doing? How are you handling those conversations within a sport where you're the new person? And then how did you handle it where, hey, you've been doing it for a while. You might not have somebody say, well, you're new and I've been here for a while.
Yeah. I'll say the best way I handled it within like baseball, rugby, but even soccer was like presenting up front as an injury, like being realistic of like, okay, and then telling them, oh, someone pulled a hamstring. Okay, this person before they return to full game availability, they need to hit all these things. So like also I luckily was like me and my medical staff there, but she wasn't very timeline based either, which made it easier. But like in those situations where I've had like worked with medical staff who are timeline based, I would just from the first meeting of a new injury of like, hey, they need to be able to do these things before they will to play. Like I'm not signing off. Like if you sign off as a medical staff, like that becomes your liability. But like I will write it on paper. I'm not signing off on this until they hit all these things. And if you want to go above my head on that, like, yo, that's on you. But also that's not communicate just to medical staff. You mean that to like the coaching staff as well. It's like, hey, fucking little Timmy hamstring over here, like has to hit this much high speed running, this intensity, this much volume, this much density, and then he's fully ready to play. But in the meantime, we'll have them in as many things as possible from a sport perspective. So if there's any drills that they can do, they 100% will be in those drills as much as possible. I was thinking if I help with most of the sport coaches, would be like, hey, just because they're injured doesn't mean they're doing nothing. It's like if they can do some of these drills, like we're gonna put them in these drills. And so sometimes I think that you appease kind of sport coaches' minds. But then I always found when it's someone's more later stage and they're almost to the point where like they look like they can kind of play in like controlled situations, but they haven't been exposed to the full chaos yet. That's when a lot of times like I'm lucky enough in pro sports, it's easy. In college, I imagine you probably can't really do this because of class schedules and stuff like that. And like NCAA rules, but like I would almost like hide that player from coaches. So like we're doing like they're doing their like in the stage stuff like either way before coaches even get there or like after when coaches are gone. So basically, so out of sight, out of mind. Like if they don't see them fucking sprinting 100%, then they won't ask about it.
So how do you do that now, working within your same population where you get a new injury that you're working with? How do you integrate the same principles now working with a combat sport and continuing to build them back up within that complexity of chaos that you just talked about within like a soccer or that soft tissue injury of a hamstring? Now with it being a combative sport where you working in MMA, I talked about it with my coach the other day. Combative sports are the only sport where the intention is to actually hurt the person you're going with. Like rugby and football, it's like, oh, like, it's still a team game where like, okay, just fucking tackle him. Like it doesn't really matter. Or basketball, the contact is incidental. But like he was telling me, he's like, you're literally taught that if you're supposed to hit them so that way they don't get up, so they don't hit you. Like how it's just completely different. How do you handle that?
I mean, currently I don't have any like cases yet, but I'll let you guys know in a month or two. I'm sure I'll get like me and I had PT here. We want to kind of like I'm gonna kind of sit down. We're gonna create kind of a framework for here. One exists currently in Shanghai, but Shanghai operates differently than we do in Vegas because like Shanghai is an academy setup, so a lot of them aren't in the UFC yet. But there's academies that try to build them up to the UFC. But also in Shanghai, because in academy stuff, they have full control. So they have like MMA coaches, striking coaches, grappling coaches, wrestling coaches, all based there. As opposed to here, we don't have designated like MMA coaches. We have coaches who come in and out who work with some guys or whatever guys who want to train here because we have like 2 octagons here and a bunch of mat space and badges and stuff. But the UFC we don't hire like Vegas-based MMA striking coach, stuff like that. So when the chance comes up, that's what's gonna have to be like some conversations with either we have the two biggest gyms here in Vegas, so like Extreme Couture and like Syndicate MMA, which like both like opposite directions of each other, like literally a mile away. If that, like that's when like if someone's at one of those places, it'll be like those conversations that have to occur. Whether or not like those coaches are open to them, different thing. Whether they listen, also a different thing. Like 100% like if this person not really whatever, a coach at Extreme Couture would be like, hey man, like go fuck yourself. Like I don't listen to that. I'm like, all right. there's nothing I can do about
it. When you just took the job, you said before, when you worked in baseball, you watched some things. What did you watch when you were taking the job at the UFC? What were the things that you were watching and what were you looking for? And what research were you also looking at? Because you did talk about, being research-based. So what were the things that you're looking at for any of our listeners that are working in combative sports?
I don't really have to look it up. I'm like a massive like MMA combat sport fan. So I have to really like go watch as many fights. I kind of watched, I was watching the fights that were coming up but I watched maybe a different kind of lens. I was looking at actual like work to rest ratios or like, okay, how much time is spent in the clinch and in the clinch, how much time is spent on the ground, how much time is it of like active working and grappling is occurring, stuff like that, just being a fucking nerd about it. But like, and then from a research perspective, it's not really like a lot, really any research really in like in MMA. I mean, luckily if we like UFC, like we have like the two journals, like the volume 1 and volume 2. So like went back through those and then looking at some research in that like in wrestling and boxing that exists, or some like normative data and things like that for a few different like testing measures and just like some general things that they're seeing within those two sports. And honestly, talking to all three of our like mutual friend William Whalen, talking to Whalen at times. Obviously, he works with 2 UFC fighters and has worked in combat sports for a long time. But also not just from that end, but also talking to him as someone who does jujitsu, who's been doing jiu-jitsu for like over a decade and is a black belt. So I having like those conversations of like on a grappling end, because I've dabbled in jiu-jitsu a handful of times. I'm fucking awful and I don't enjoy it. So like I stick to just Muay Thai, which I'm doing for like 3 years now. But I'm just trying to peel my so I can understand from a striking perspective. Okay, what's some of the things you're seeing that you feel when you like from a grappling class? What's a jiu-jitsu class kind of roughly like? You've been going to them for over a decade. So like, so having those kind of conversations. And then it's gonna sound like a plug or whatever, but like his presentation on Strength Coach Network about kind of like combat sports is really good and very insightful and very like pragmatic as well. Like you get a lot of with the MMA. There's this in other sports, but I think maybe in MMA it might actually exist more. It's like this idea of trying to be specific with everything. It's like it's like everything can't be specific because it's not like you're not following rules of dynamic correspondence. Like it's just not what you think. The thing is like, well, let's be like pragmatic. What are the big rocks we can hit for a lot of MMA and just combat sport athletes? A lot of them tend to be pretty weak overall. Like relative strength tends to be decent because of body weight sport, weight class sport, but like absolute strength tend to be pretty poor. Like most of them tend to be pretty weak overall. So okay, we can chase some of those things. General power, most of them their idea of doing power work is doing 1 million kettlebell swings because we're using swinging around Bulgarian badge because that's what everyone does and they saw on YouTube. Like, so like it's like oh, because I know this is what true power is. We can do like a trap bar jump, or we can do some like repeat count movement jumps and shit like that. Like, I think it was up last like pull the floor. Like I feel like there's a lot. You can do a lot. You can do a lot with just pulling the floor in MMA versus trying to raise the ceiling. Because the sport takes care of so much. Just so like the sport is task specific. Like,
yeah. Do you have any desire then, because you've identified a kind of a gap in literature, to try to produce some of your own literature? And do you have any desire to try to come up with some standardized or some version of a conditioning test, kind of like what Keir did with the tribe test? Because, like you said, you put the nerd glasses on and you've been a fan of it, and sitting back and being within it, you're like, all right, I want to kind of run some pilot stuff, being that analytical, nerdy mind of yours. Do you have any desire in the future to do that?
No, not in the slightest. I mean, we're kind of doing that. Like I said, but like, we're kind of almost like doing that anyway, because the nature of this facility is that, and kind of the goal of the UFCPI is not just to be leaders in like performance for the sport, but also help drive the sport in that sense. So that's why they have that's why they produce the 2 journals. I think we're gonna do a volume 3, more than likely. And just basically to like culminate and deliver information and create. Just like sport, you do like a needs analysis. Well, one, like you can't really do. There's no research paper that has like a needs analysis of MMA, essentially. So basically, what we're trying to do, like one of our goals, is to do that, because we're the only promotion. Like not one of doesn't have this, Bellator doesn't have it. They don't have anything like this where they have their own facility and fighters, and it's completely free to fighters. Like the UFC fighters can come anytime they want. And then we use it to like collect tons of data. We have some general like tier 1 tests that we do, like a landmine, punch throw, isometric mid thigh pull, a neck assessment on a force frame, and a counter movement jump, like load velocity profile. And so those kind of like our big 4. So when athletes come in, they do those like from a strength and power basis. And then we have 3 ESD tests that we do on it's like the upgraded version of the assault bike. It's like the newest, so it's not as big as an Echo, because like the Echo was too much, especially at the lighter weight class men and the lighter weight class women. It was just too heavy. Couldn't get with what we're chasing for. So we use like this assault bike, and to get like MAP, so like max alactic power, MGP, max glycolytic power, and then aerobic power. Those are like our 3 ESD tests. And then we have like our PT does like a bunch of like orthopedic assessments, stuff like that. So we kind of have to wear 2 hats here in that sense. We have to be like drivers of kind of like research and trying to push the actual sport itself in the right direction, and be the ones who kind of gather information for like, hey, this is what an elite MMA athlete looks like across all these weight classes. And it's like roughly, obviously everyone's going to fit their own buckets. There's going to be a norm. It's going to be distribution, like a bell curve. Like some will fit on the extremes of different areas, and others won't. And then in the performance end, it's like, hey, we still have a duty to the fighters who train here full time, or that train with us like remotely. Like we have a duty to them to make sure they're in the best physical, like from a physical end, in the best physical sense they can be, like when it comes to like fight time. And we have things like first speed here. We got fucking so much fucking tech around this bitch. Like
you talked about it a lot recently with talking about body weight and body weight cuts. What does that look like for you? How involved are you, or is there a nutritionist in terms of helping them with their body weight cuts? What things did you learn from them, and what things were you able to kind of help enlighten them on? Because like you said, they thought power training was a million kettlebell swings. Were you able to come in and kind of give them some aha moments on better ways of weight loss and cutting for fights?
When it comes to like the weight side, like we have 5 full-time dietitians, four full-time like dietitians, and like they're like, I mean, fuck. I mean, they're probably overworked, like they could, because the nature of like it being a weight class sport, and guys typically historically have everyone's is just in their own little silos, or they hire Johnny nutritionist who took like a PN1 course one time. And I was like, I was like, now I can make anybody lose weight. I can make anybody like just like wake up for a fight. Who needs liver and kidneys, bro? Don't worry about it. And so you have like those ends of like, because the wild west of like, you have these guys who are these like nutritionists, or some of you dietitians who just don't know anything about cutting weight. You have the other end of, you have guys who are really good. And then our dietitians are fucking phenomenal. Like, and then because they're good at their jobs, they get like more and more fighters who want to work with them. And so they provide like things like icon meals for guys that are like doing 8 weeks of a fight, supplements. We have some supplement sponsorships and like partnership things like Thorn and stuff like that, which is like super helpful. And then we have the ability to do like RMR here. He's like a metabolic cart, along with and we have like a DEXA scan here and stuff like that. And they're also, I think all of them are like ISAC certified, so they do that skin folds too. We don't do skin folds typically because of time constraint. Like there's only 4 or 5 of them, and there's, I don't know, I think on a roster 650 fighters total. Like yeah,
wow,
so
I didn't realize it was that big.
yeah, so I would say like I don't know if I've really enlightened them on anything. I think they probably just more enlightened me on stuff in terms of like nutrition and things like that. And like a big one I kind of learned from them is timing and like fueling of timing. And also the faces like the type of fuel. Like he's like, oh, we have UCAN for a bit slower release. We got Vitargo for a bit faster. You know, if someone's in a later stage of the weight cut, so they're a bit depleted from like a calorie perspective, and they can't give them more calories. Even like simple things like hydration drinks and BCAAs, like it's that little bit of like sweetness that can kind of wake you up a little bit to like to train. You can't train hard because you're like depleted, but like you can still like train. And they have like some general guides. They try to have guys that it's like 20% outside of, you want to be within 20% of your fight weight, like when you're away from camp. And I think about a week of, it's like no more than 10, ideally, week of.
Yep. And then they're going to do the big water cut. They
Yeah.
got guys doing like gallon or two, like 2 days before, and then like cut that in half each day. Cause that was something I had never heard of in terms of just trying to suck all that water weight out.
Yeah, just like some guys, like those like the water loading versus like water taper, they kind of go based on what the athlete has, what's worked for them in the past. Because some guys like they don't want to change fully how they do their routine. Like I think the biggest thing they try to do is to get guys just to be lighter, like outside of camps. But essentially, a big part of like our jobs too within MMA is that sometimes in MMA you have an issue of guys not being professional all the time. So it's like easy to be professional, like, oh, I have a fight booked, so now like I'm focused. It's like, yeah, but you're 30 pounds over your fight weight. Like, and it's not 30 pounds of good. Like, and so you have like that kind of shit. Just like historically, there's been lots of guys who have been very successful, like doing that, like having that. So trying to teach that education piece of like, hey, if you fight 155, you don't really gotta be 180. Like, it's like, I I know of one lightweight who walks in the cage at 190. Yeah, he gains that much weight back from after I put like depleting all the glycogen and water in his body. By the time he steps in the cage, he's 188 to 190 pounds.
How much of your time is split up with all those different people within the team? How many of them are, within a camp, or how many of them are in their off season, training, and how drastically different is it in terms of what you're doing with them and how much time you get with them?
Also the time you get with them can vary kind of a lot. Sometimes in camp, depending where they're at in camp, they may do 3 times a week. They may do 2. Some even go down to like 1, or they'll have to cancel last minute because they're just dead, especially as later in camp. Especially if you don't know their schedule too, like training wise, because within combat sports, there's like the class environment. It's still it's even like within like professional MMA guys, there's still like they call like MMA team training. So it's like you're doing the same thing. Like you can be a featherweight in a class, but like maybe your class has some heavyweights, some middleweights, and you're all doing pretty much the same thing in class. So like there's like that dynamic of it too. Well, sometimes you have lightweights training like heavyweights and heavyweights training like lightweights, just because of nature, whatever the class setup, whoever your head coach is. So the time we get with them can vary a ton. Usually, like out of camp, like you can get like 3 or 4 days a week. That's great. At minimum, we try to get at least 3. If they're out of camp, like no fight planned, so they've been doing a lot of GPP work. And then once you get into camp, usually 12 weeks out, it's not a lot of them will still maintain like a 3-day a week. And then once you get to 8, usually we try to cut down to 2. This is now all some of that resources are just going towards like technical, tactical work.
Yeah. How much do you miss any of that team, the team sport of it? Because you were just with basketball. And if any of our listeners are like, man, you know what, I think I want to get out of college, or I want to get into some of these new fields where the UFC's popping up and the H2F. And I know you're not with that, but talk to any of them that are listening about, the life that you have, or anything that you may be missing, not now working in a team sport in college, like what that's like for you, the individual, not only just as a coach.
Yeah. I thought like going into that, maybe I may miss like being like a true like team environment. So I fucking don't. Not necessarily. Well, I think some of that too is, I think a big part of it is knowing what you want like out of life. Because like even within a team setting, like I was like you, DeMarco, like from a lifestyle piece, I fucking winning it in a team setting. So I think it's having those boundaries. I think a big part of it is like knowing who you are first, knowing what you want, like career wise, having an identity outside of your job. So I know we all know so many, not just SSC coaches, but sport coaches who like there's no life outside of like they don't like their identity is attached to their job or attached to their logo, their school, or the organization they work for. And so I think detaching your identity from that is a big piece. So yeah, that fucking hard introspective talks of like, you're like, is the first thing you say when you meet people is that you fucking work in sports? Like that's fucking sad. Like that cannot be the biggest thing that's going on in your life is your job. And so I think that's probably where it has to start, is from my identity piece. And like, if you're attaching your identity and who you are to like, I work with this team, or we've won this many games, we won this many championships. Like, bro, your kids and your grandkids don't gonna give a shit about any of that. Or like your other family members don't really care that much. So I think it kind of starts with like on that piece of like having a bit of like self-introspective talk, or that's honest as well. Being like, like, oh, okay, I attach my identity to being a head S&C coach or whatever. I attach my identity to I work in the NBA, I work in the NFL or whatever. And it's like, until you really had that conversation, it's like, you should probably just stay where you are. But bosses understands like there's a risk reward factor too. Like I know me getting out of like team environment, like if I ever want to go back, which I can't imagine in a world like I really would, unless like a perfect situation or something. Like I know like it's pretty much be a pretty big shot in the dark. And I've been a head of a department at the Kansas City, and then I've been a head SSC coach in college basketball. And I know it might be fucking hard for me to get a fucking team job again. Like, but like I'm comfortable with that because I enjoy my life I live now. Like I have, let's see, I pretty much have every Sunday off. I have pretty much, unless someone's in camp and like they need to train, like the Saturdays like their scheduled training day, then like I have every weekend off. I don't have to travel for fights in my role. All right, dietitian and PTs that they travel for fight events, and yeah, I get every holiday off. Like they were like, I asked them, I was for 4th of July, like what was kind of plan. And then our director of nutrition and dietetics was like, if you don't have anybody in camp, fucking do whatever the fuck you want. Fucking shoot fireworks. I don't care. I was like, oh, sweet. So I don't have to be here. He's like, no. He's like, dude, like, you can show up if you want. No one else is gonna fucking be here. I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty sweet.
Did you have any like odd moments when you were working when you showed up there and it's like, oh man, like that's so and so, like, and if it was, who was it for you, being somebody that had watched the sport?
Cool. I think probably meeting. I never tell Forrest this to his face, but probably meeting Forrest Griffin was like the little kid. It was him, because I watched the tough series that he coached, watched the tough series he won. So I was a big like Forrest Griffin fan. And also, so at Extreme Couture, Ray Sefo works there. Ray Sefo, like legendary, like kickboxing, fought in Pride, stuff like that. It's Kiwi, big like Ponzi Kiwi dude, Kiwi and Samoan. And so I met him because he's the coach, the main crew, a fighter I work with. And the little kid in me was just like, hi, Mr. Sefo, nice to meet you. I love watching your fights. And you want to talk about a master of the sport, like a small side from it. It was like, was what he was sparring with the fighter like I work with, and he wasn't even looking at him. And weaving every single punch and kick he threw. Like what he was talking to me and an SEC coach who brought me over there, who works there as well. He was literally looking at us and talking to us, rocking to like music, just like making him miss constantly. I was like, and then like hitting him back without looking. I was like, what the fuck? like it was crazy to see. Like it was.
Have any of the guys you worked with asked you to be like, hey, hop in the ring with me? Let me show you like my world. Have they tried doing that to you at all? Or you think they're like, is that coming down the road?
Luckily no. Also, I don't know if they tell them. I know it's like against like our rules, obviously, and like spar with guys. But yeah, luckily none of them.
Are they ever like, hey,
I don't know what
ring, let me put you through one of my workouts of like what I think is tough or something like that, like something like that of like, hey, I'll hold. They're like, I'll hold mitts for you, things like that.
I mean, no one's off. Someone did. So I went to like one of the gyms here, other big image and syndicate. I did a Muay Thai class there like my first or second week. And so I was actually coached by one of the fighters here because he like coaches that class. So that was like pretty funny. I did like a bunch of bad work and he was trying to murder us. But no, luckily like no one's offered to. Someone should hold pads. I mean, fuck, I don't work here.
Yeah, exactly. No, man, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else that you want to leave the members that are working with Combat Sports, like, hey, this is the biggest piece of information you want them to take away from this conversation, that they can, improve or use, day one?
Oh, biggest piece. I'll probably say the biggest piece is going back to what I was saying earlier, like William Whalen type of fashion, just like be pragmatic with your training, like in your program, like handle the big pieces first. Like not everything needs to be like fancy looking. Everything needs to be like it's overcomplicated exercise, because the most specific thing they do is that they train their sport every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. It's like maybe let the weight room piece be like more general, because that's going to be the biggest benefit to them in a general like robustness sense.
Yeah, no, that kind of reminds me, Fernando, of the conversation we had, after the Taekwondo webinar, where like the biggest thing was just the fact that they needed to be able to turn up to training. Like,
yeah,
if your fighters aren't able to train with their tactical coaches, you've got to continue to build that general robustness so that way they can turn up to training.
Yeah, 100%. That's like, especially when guys feel like they feel super beat up at bad timings, like they will switch off doing S&C, because they know like, okay, the thing that's make me win the fight the most is being good at fighting.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, man. If anybody doesn't know where to follow you, where they want to follow you on social media, so that way they can see what you're doing there.
Instagram is T Kennell Phys Prep. Twitter is just TK Phys Prep. I mean, if you want to see me talking about zero training at all ever, pretty much, or most S&C stuff, then just follow me on Twitter, because most of that's not S&C. I mean, even my Instagram, most of that's not S&C either. But so if you're coming for education, do not follow me, because you will get very little of it.
No, man, I thank you for the time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, appreciate it. Take care.
Celebrate by watching more videos just like it. You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.